Hey there, I'm Hallie, and we are coming on the air with an update right now from officials in Idaho on that investigation into a deadly ambush on firefighters responding to a brush fire. You see the county sheriff speaking now. Let's listen in.
Making a containment on a 3.2 square mile mountain. And to let you know that we had a jumper off a Veterans Bridge, and we'll give you just a little bit of information on that. So the suspect that has been identified by our Cooney County Coroner's Office, Coroner Duke Johnson there, has been identified as Wes Val Rowley, date of birth of May 1st, 2005. As of right now, and this is all very, very preliminary, we've had a lot of resources at the crime scene. We've been working through the night, so many of these facts are subject to change. We believe that Rowley has prior residence in California, Arizona, and Idaho. We believe he was born in California. The Cooney County Sheriff's Office and Coeur d'Alene Police Department, we've had 5 interactions with Rowley. And of those 5 interactions, we've had 3, Coeur d'Alene Police had 2. They're very, very minor in nature. They had to do with more trespassing. He was trespassing at a location. He was asked to leave, and he cooperated. We had some welfare checks on Rowley, and very, very minor. We don't show any criminal history for Rowley. We do have some social media presence for for Rowley. I find it disgusting to call him a Mr., but we don't have any much to go on. Here's some of his social media postings that were recently removed from social media. I believe this one was Instagram. And we have some copies of this that Lieutenant Mark Ellis will distribute. Where we're at with the crime scene. The crime scene is active. We still have the suspect's vehicle that is up down an embankment of the mountain. Deputies who responded on scene to protect life and engage the suspect thought it would be in their best interest to get rid of what they thought was Rowley's vehicle. So they had the frame of mind to push it over the side so he couldn't come around and get in that vehicle and flee. So we have not been able to find any manifesto. We have not been able to inventory the vehicle, although people that have seen the vehicle do believe it appeared as if he was living in the vehicle. There was a lot of debris that's in the vehicle, so that's all we have on that. Like I said again, we have not verified or found any manifesto. We have not done an inventory of that vehicle. I'd like to give you an update on the fire that we believe Rowley started. Rowley was found to be in possession of a flint starter, and we believe that was his method for starting the fire that eventually led to firefighters responding. So as of right now, the fire is at 26 acres. It has not grown. It is a slow progress because it's very difficult terrain to get assets, ground assets up there. Idaho Department of Lands is putting a lot of water on it from aerial supports, so that's going rather well. They believe they'll have a fire line around it by dark tonight. There are no structures that are threatened. Again, I'd like to say that last night about 11 p.m., we did receive information that an individual jumped from Veterans Bridge. That is not related to this situation whatsoever. We don't find any nexus to the murdering of the 2 firefighters and injuring of 1. Now, we have some of our incident commander who was here last night. That was the incident command of the scene. We have some of our SWAT operators that were here last night, and we had about 27 containment points on this mountain. And just to give you an idea, when you're setting up a containment in an urban setting, you might have 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks that you're setting up a containment on. But when you are setting up on a mountain, that just provides a lot more difficult dynamics than if it were a city block. So we, to the 27 containment points, we had 2, 3, 4 officers per containment point. And then we have a primary containment point where we believe the suspect is. And then we have a secondary containment point. And we absolutely utilized every resource that responded to the command post. And I do have the incident commander from last night if there's any questions. Kevin and Jeremy Heil, Kevin Smart, can you come up here just to be here just in case somebody has any questions? And
coming up, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
You mentioned that there was no prior record. Are you talking specifically in Idaho, or is this also for California and Arizona?
at this time, we can't locate a criminal record for this individual. We've had interactions with him, but we don't find a criminal record with him. Also, we don't find that there's any nexus to any Islamic Jihad, which is also being disseminated on social media. We don't find that there's a nexus to that either. Yes, we're going to take questions.
Alex with the spokesman review. So are we clear, did the suspect die by suicide or was he shot by police? Do you know that?
It appears that he shot himself. Yes.
Do you know if he was stockpiling weapons up there or why he was on the mountain specifically? One gun, multiple guns?
We have information that he at one time wanted to be a firefighter. So we don't know if there's a nexus to that desire and what happened yesterday, but there is information that we've received that he at one time wanted to be a firefighter. So we're still processing the scene. It's going to take a few days to do that, especially with the current fire that's there. So, John?
Sheriff, have they had any communication with the fire district about a potential job there?
We have checked some of the fire entities here, and we have not located where he had either put in an application or put in some sort of a interest form. We have not found that yet. So that, yeah, we have not found that.
One more question. There appears to be a video on Instagram. Was this posted right before the ambush?
Well, it was discovered right before, but I don't know how long it had been there. Yeah.
Do you have any indication of the motive?
Yeah, no, we don't have any indication of any motive at this time. And we, certainly we will continue to investigate that, but obviously we go on intent, and so but we will certainly find out, or if there's any evidence to believe that there was a motive, we will do that. And I think an inventory of the vehicle would be a good place to start.
Do you think his desire to potentially become a firefighter is part of this?
We just don't know. Yeah, we just don't know. The gentleman.
Ordered these firearms? Has that been determined yet? If these were his firearms that were used, or were they someone else's?
It has not been determined yet. The lady in the green.
Sheriff Cody Proctor with Crime 2 News. You mentioned that he had had interactions before with law enforcement, but had he had interactions before with firefighters?
We did not check to see if he had any interaction with firefighters. We do know that he did contact the firefighters when they came on scene, and there was a discussion. So, so we're still in the process of investigating that part of it. So, gentleman in the blue in the back.
Sheriff, Hunter Bush, so like, talk to me about, why you're sharing this Instagram post. Talk to us, what does it look like when you're looking at this and what it symbolizes to the department?
Well, we're trying to collect any and all information, and those social media posts are what we call open source information. So this is all in an effort to find out intent, to find out if there was any other, if there was a motive or whatever the case may be. But
Another question. We had some people that live in the area of the evacuation zone last night, or the shelter in place. They say they didn't get a phone call, they didn't get a text. How does your system work? Was there a text that went out, or how did you let people know?
yes, absolutely. Part of our Kootenai alerts system, we sent out a text, I believe, a 5-mile radius, and I encourage people who live or frequent the area to sign up for Kootenai alerts. So
That's an opt-in service.
well, yes, yep. The gentleman in the blue.
Sure. The welfare checks that you guys initiated,
Yeah.
were they given by a relative? Did a parent call you to check on him, or are they concerned about his mental health?
No, it was generally a reporting party who called and saw a vehicle that was either parked near their property or on their property. One was a restaurant where he appeared to be residing at. He was asked to leave and he complied. So none of them that we have at this time were called in from a relative. They were called in from a property owner or passerby. The gentleman there in the...
Sheriff, can you describe the weapon that you found next to him?
It appears right now we have a shotgun that was used, but we're still processing the scene.
So obviously a shotgun is not a sniper weapon.
Correct.
Do you know of what kind of weapon that was?
Well, we're still processing the scene, but let me kind of set the scene for everybody. When you're in a rural area and you're heavily treed, heavily brushed, and when you're taking fire, then it just adds a whole different dynamic to the situation. So what was reported by people on scene, by peace officers on scene, that they believed they were taking sniper fire, yes. And that's where that is. Lady in the black.
Hi, was he a suspect before you found him, or did you not identify him until after you found his remains?
Can you give me that first part again?
Was he a suspect prior to you finding his body, or were you not sure who he was until after you found his remains?
Well, we had information that we had an idea who that person might be, but we always defer to the coroner's office to make sure that we have a positive identification on the individual. People borrow people's car, people use people's phones. Yeah, so we always want to make sure that we have a positive identification before we make any type of release. So this lady.
Are you able to identify yet if Wes was the person who called 911, who made the initial 911 call?
Still under investigation. If that is the case, he did not use his real name. So, but it certainly will be part of the investigation. But we had an individual called, a male, and he did not use the suspect's name. So.
And one more clarification, because I think I misunderstood. Did you say there was an interaction with first responders
There was an interaction with the firefighters.
when they first arrived on the scene?
Correct.
What was that like?
It had something to do with his vehicle being parked where it was. So, yeah. The gentleman in the blue in the back.
Can you tell us what type of bullets then were used in the attack on the two or three firefighters? It's obviously you can tell the difference between a shotgun.
Right. Well, we know that some rifled slugs were used, and a rifled slug is a pretty big projectile. Anybody know off the top of their head how many grains a rifled slug is? Yeah. So generally going to be a 1 ounce piece of metal. But we also have some fragmentation of something. So it's still early on. You know, we have some smaller projectiles, and we don't know if that was a fragmentation of one of the rifled slugs or another weapon. Like I said, we are still processing that scene. The firefighters are putting water on it, so we're still processing that. Yes, sir.
Sheriff, can you tell us how sophisticated you think this ambush was? Or do you think this was an interaction that went badly? And one more thing, we were just right outside the scene, and we saw a firefighting vehicle come down with 3 completely flat tires. Were spikes used? Was that part of the ambush?
No, part of once the rounds started to exchange back and forth, and when deputies got on the scene, part of the theory was we don't want him to be able to circle back around and get into either one of the fire trucks or his own vehicle. So deputies disabled the trucks, and they pushed over the suspect vehicle off the side of the mountain.
I mean, that just gives you a sense of how chaotic the moment must have been. They're disabling and crippling their own vehicles so that the suspect that's unseen and elusive wouldn't be able to circle back and use them.
Right. And we just don't, you know, we just don't know in many cases, even if it's in an urban setting in a retail shopping center, how many suspects there are. Because we're going to get different information, and we have to be able to evaluate that information to see what's credible, what's not credible. We always want to err on the side of caution, but initial reports were what there was more than one suspect. Right here.
Hi, I just want to make sure I'm completely clear on this. So at the moment, as things stand as far as the weapons go, you're confident that he used a shotgun. It's possible that he used another weapon. You're not absolutely sure, and you don't know what the other weapon would be. Is that right?
Yeah, we're still processing the scene. So we know that there was a shotgun used. Absolutely. 100%. We know that for sure. So.
I'm sorry, this was already asked. Do you have like survivalist training or any type of like?
We cannot find any evidence that he has had any type of survivalist training. Now, he did grow up in a, from what we understand, he did grow up in a arborist family, and that they climb trees. And we did have reports that he was shooting at first responders via a tree. So he does have experience climbing trees.
I also just wanted to clarify, you had said in the previous press conference, you were talking about this information, this is kind of going off the beaten path, but can you elaborate a bit on what that misinformation was? And I guess it felt like you had said families were finding out via Facebook.
Yeah.
I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, so what happened, firefighting and EMS channels here in Kootenai County are not, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not encrypted. Law enforcement channels are encrypted. So pretty quickly, there was audio of the help call that came out and was broadcasted on social media. And that is just, really, really hard on the families. Had they heard that, and I don't know if they did or didn't, but had they heard that, they would be able to identify their voice of their loved one and just make a chaotic situation more chaotic. So that's one of the.
I just want to be clear, none of the families were notified through social media. They were.
I don't know. I wasn't involved in that part of it. Yeah, I do not know. Lady in the black there.
You have been listening to the Kootenai County Sheriff delivering that update now on the investigation into the deadly ambush that left 2 firefighters dead, a third in the hospital, and a lot of news coming out of that with the identification now officially of the suspected shooter who apparently died by suicide, according to the sheriff in that update. This is somebody 20 years old who apparently had told people around him that he at one point wanted to be a firefighter. He'd had a number of interactions with law enforcement in this area in northern Idaho Idaho at Coeur d'Alene, but none of them were anything major. They were just sort of minor interactions, according to the sheriff there. And there was this interaction when firefighters first responded. So again, to walk you through the timeline, officials have laid out that this person basically set a fire. Firefighters responded, and then this individual began shooting them. And that is what led to this ambush here. There was an interaction in the beginning related to this vehicle that was ultimately, after the shooting began, pushed over the side of a mountain so that the suspect couldn't come back and drive away. Let me bring in Tom Winter and Camila Bernal now. Camila, one of the big questions here had been motive. No word on that, no suspected motive that officials have laid out so far. They do say that they did not find a manifesto here.
That's right, Hallie. And so in the course of this investigation, they did also say that they've got to get through his car. Really, quite a bit of police work that was done here, clearly understanding their environment. They're used to this rural environment, the sheriff's office. And so what they did, according to this briefing that we just received, is that they realized that this was this individual's car, and they've kind of pushed it off the road and kind of down a ravine to get it off of the road. So that should that suspect have come back, he wasn't going to be able to use his own car to get out of there or to go to another location and begin firing. So that was something that law enforcement did to disable it. But according to the sheriff, Bob Norris, apparently there's a lot of debris inside the car, and there's some indications that this individual was living there. So that's something that they still need to go through. Perhaps there's some information on motive there. As you began the program, we have reported today in an interview with our colleague Eric Ortiz, the grandfather of this individual, telling NBC News that it was his dream to be a firefighter. We're talking about Wes Rulli, of course, this 20-year-old who's been identified by police as the shooter. So apparently it was his dream to be a firefighter. Interestingly, the sheriff's office there confirming that they went around to the various firefighting units or the various firefighting companies there in that area, and they can't find an application for this individual, but they know that he grew up in California, previous ties to Arizona as well as Idaho. You mentioned those 5 calls for service, apparently mostly trespassing or some form of a wellness check. So clearly at some point somebody was interested in this individual's well-being and thought that the only way that they could be found or contacted is through police. So love to know more about that. A couple other pieces of information that came out. Apparently he had a flint starter. That's how he started the fire. And he also had a shotgun on his person. They're going to look to get some other projectiles once they get that fire out, which stands at 26 acres now, mostly contained. They're going to try to be able to go in there and figure out if there's any sort of weapons that were there. Just a quick editorial, Hallie, and you know I don't normally do this. That police briefing is refreshing to see because we so rarely get that level of detail. Also to hear from law enforcement, I don't know. That's always a plus. It's nice to know where they're at with that. And then also to just have it delivered in such a calm and professional manner. It's sometimes a bit of a rarity, and that was something that was nice to see tonight as far as a level of transparency.
A lot of information, Tom, to your point. And Camila, I know you're monitoring all of it as well there on the West Coast, including that this suspect came from, I guess, a family of arborists, as the sheriff described it. So had some ability to climb trees, which obviously plays into the scene that unfolded yesterday on Canfield Mountain.
Yeah, that was another very interesting detail because he said that he was at some point shooting from that tree. And so he spoke about how difficult it was for law enforcement as they were essentially trying to figure out where this fire was coming from. And so part of it was the fact that he was up on a tree. They, of course, mentioned that he was using a shotgun, but he talked about how wooded this area is and how difficult that made it. And we talked about the car and then pushing it over the mountain, but he was saying it was because they were worried that he would go around the mountain and come back either to his car or to one of the fire trucks. And so that's what law enforcement was dealing with yesterday as they were trying to figure out where the gunfire was coming from and where this person was. We know, obviously, from reporting yesterday that they were able to find him because of his cell phone. The signal on his phone led authorities to where he was. He had already killed himself, and they had to scoop him out of the crime scene because the fire that he set was already coming close to that crime scene. So they decided to do this, which is something they don't normally do when it comes to a crime scene. But yeah, a lot of new details that we learned today. And again, the biggest thing is motive. And when they were asked directly what the motive was, there is no motive, but at least we know a little bit of background. They also showed some Instagram photos, and the sheriff saying he wanted them out there better so that people see them and maybe identify them, and then maybe lead to a better mode of explanation.
Camila Bernal, Tom Winter, thank you both very much for that. We're going to continue monitoring any news coming out of that news conference, and I know we'll see you back again at the top of the next hour. Appreciate it. In the meantime, we've got to take you over to New York because there's new drama in the Diddy trial going down behind closed doors tonight inside the jury room. Because as the jury now has this sex trafficking case, as they're deliberating, as they've sent another note in the last few minutes to the judge, they had sent one earlier suggesting one of the jurors is not following instructions. And that note, pointing the finger at juror 3, apparently. We don't really know any other specifics at this point. Some tense moments as the court waited for the judge to decide what to do. He ended up sending back his own note, reminding the jurors it is their obligation. He said, I remind you of the need to deliberate and to follow the law. That is their job. As all that was happening outside the jury room, our team at the courthouse tells us Diddy was up. He was talking with his family, at one point holding books in front of him for the press and the public to see. The power of positive thinking and the happiness advantage, clearly meant to send a message. Remember, Sean Combs is facing 5 counts on charges including sex trafficking and racketeering. Combs has pleaded not guilty. His team says the sexual encounters he had were consensual. Rahima Ellis is outside court for us in New York. So this other note just came in. The jury's done for the day, but they had a question on drug distribution, apparently. The other note, and again, we're looking at these notes like tea leaves because we don't know what's happening behind closed doors. The other note was about these issues with the juror. Tell us more about what's going down and what we expect tomorrow.
Let me tell you, they sent 2 notes, Hallie, as you were just talking about. And this is the verdict sheet that they have. This count 1 is the racketeering conspiracy. And let me read this to you, and I'm not going to make any interpretations about what this means. But on racketeering conspiracy, it says, how do you find the defendant? Not guilty or guilty. Then it goes on to say, if and only if you find the defendant guilty of count 1, which types of racketeering acts do you unanimously find were involved in the offense? There are 8 different types of racketeering acts that they have to decide of 1 or only 2 are necessary. The one that they asked about is number 8 down here, and it involves acts involving drug distribution. Their question to the judge was referring to page 37 of the judge's charge to the jury about instructions of the law. That went on, I should tell you, it was about 2 hours of the judge instructing them. We don't have the transcript set, so I can't tell you exactly what he said, but here's what their note says. Judge, referring to page 37, the jury charge, if a recipient asks for controlled substances and hands to the requester, is the individual the distributor? That's the question that's being asked here, and that is a question of drug distribution. Hallie, I don't know what it means. The judge didn't say either.
That's right.
He said he would. Their other note was, you're gone for the day at 5 o'clock. Come back tomorrow at 9, and I will address this question that you have presented to us. I don't want to read anything into it because we shouldn't, because we don't know what it means. I'm just telling you what happened.
No, it's good. I mean, listen, it's the only information that we're getting from inside that jury room, Rahima, to your point here. So I think more to come tomorrow morning. And as all of it's happening, it is very much the case that Sean Combs's freedom is on the line here. His fate is in their hands. And as this is all happening, some interesting moments from inside court for this person who's been at the center of this former superstar at the center of this bombshell trial, Rahima.
It really is. He came into court this morning smiling, and he hugged his defense team. He looked at his children who were in the courtroom, as well as his mother who was in the courtroom. At one point, they prayed together. They clapped after they prayed. And then it was time. That was the jurors had already gone, and they were having a celebratory moment, if you will. Interestingly, as you point out, the power of positive thinking. The defense attorney was overheard saying that during deliberations, he would like some books to be given to Sean Combs while he is waiting for the jury to deliberate. This possibly is one of those books that he was talking about, and all about keeping his mood, his spirit, and the spirit of his family up and buoyant as they wait for this jury to decide his fate. He could, if he is found guilty, he could get anywhere from 15 to life in prison. Even if not found guilty of any of this, he still has court cases because there are several civil cases pending against him.
That's a really good point. Rahima Ellis on the beat there in New York as we are now on verdict watch as of tomorrow morning again in this trial. Rahima, thank you very much. Let's bring it back here to Washington, because over at the Capitol, not too far from where I'm sitting, plenty of action as Senate Republicans try to push through the president's multi-trillion-dollar mega bill. Right now, look at this. They're in the middle of this marathon voting session. We call it a votorama. You can call it that, too. They're proposing and voting on a whole bunch of amendments, including one that would blow up precedent on the way the Senate calculates the price tag of these kinds of things. That has Democrats throwing the flag, accusing Republicans of magic math as they try to make sure the numbers add up correctly. We're going to have more on that in a second as you're taking a look here earlier at the top Senate Democrat on the Senate floor. Remember, this is not the final vote yet. Okay, what we're to this votorama, this is amendments. This is not the final vote yet. And until that happens, a lot could change on what's in and out of this massive bill. But for now, here's a look at what it means for you and your tax dollars so far in tonight's breakdown. To the president, it's gorgeous.
We call it a great, big, beautiful bill because that's what it is.
But to Democrats, an ugly betrayal.
The bill before the Senate is utter poison.
940 pages that make up the foundation of President Trump's agenda. So what's actually in it? Start with tax cuts, a huge piece of this plan. As written, the bill would make the president's signature 2017 cuts permanent.
It's been an amazing experience.
The bill would also let people deduct more of their state and local income taxes for the next 5 years, which Republicans from blue states with higher taxes really wanted. And it would fulfill a Trump campaign promise by implementing no tax on tips, overtime, or car loans. On other issues, the bill boosts spending on immigration enforcement with more money for the border wall and for ICE. It beefs up military spending, including money for space programs and moving the historic Space Shuttle Discovery from blue-leaning Virginia to ruby-red Texas.
The shuttle has cleared the tower.
And it calls for funding the so-called Golden Dome, a U.S. air missile defense system. But all those tax cuts and extra spending are expensive. So how's it being paid for?
We're cutting $1.7 trillion in this bill, and you're not going to feel any of it.
Critics say that's not even close to being true, considering the cuts the bill calls for to social safety nets that lower-income Americans rely on, with even some Republicans who voted to move the bill forward concerned.
If we're going to be a working class party, we've got to protect working people. And I just, the Medicaid stuff in here, I think is bad.
New requirements and restrictions for Medicaid could make it harder to earn its benefits, effectively, experts say, kicking people off. A new estimate predicts more than 10 million Americans would lose their health insurance.
We're not talking about living this life of luxury with Medicaid. We are honestly talking about this life and death and how do we provide for our child in our home.
And the bill also makes changes to the SNAP program, or food stamps, to save billions. It gets rid of green energy and environmental credits, too. Democrats sounding the alarm.
I will tell you that this is the most dangerous piece of legislation I've ever seen during my time in Congress.
But many Republicans ready to celebrate.
I think it's going to be a beautiful day for the big, beautiful bill.
I want to bring in now our Melanie Zanona, who's joining us now from Capitol Hill. Question is this going to make it through the Senate here? What's happened in the House? But before we get there, let me start with what we alluded to at the top. This what Democrats are calling, fuzzy math, essentially, this policy gimmick, because the Budget Office, the Congressional Budget Office, says this is going to add more than $3 trillion to the deficit. Republicans say, wait a second, we're calculating it a little bit differently. What is the reality check and why does it matter?
Okay, I'm going to try to explain this in the least wonky way possible. So every time there's a bill, it gets a score or a cost estimate from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. The CBO score for this bill, as you mentioned, estimated that it would add to the deficit $3.3 trillion over the decade, as well as estimating that 11.8 million Americans would lose their health insurance. That's because of cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and other reforms to health care. But Republicans are disputing that cost estimate. And the reason why is because at the centerpiece of this package is an extension of the current tax rates, those current tax cuts that were put into place under Trump's first term in 2017. And Republicans are saying that shouldn't cost anything. That should count as $0 because it's an extension of the status quo. So that's why you're hearing these differing accounts about how much this bill would actually cost. Now, the reason why this matters, Hallie, for a couple of reasons. Number one, deficit spending and spending cuts were a huge concern concern for fiscal hawks. So whether or not they are ultimately convinced that this bill is going to do enough to rein in government spending is a huge open question, particularly over in the House, where this bill still has to pass. And the other reason why it matters is because of the new precedent that this could set. Eventually, there's going to be another Democratic president, another Democratic-controlled Congress at some point. They are already talking about using that same, what they are calling accounting gimmick, to try to pass some of their own priorities at no cost. So there are real ramifications here, long-term impacts. But for now, Republicans are trying to use that to push ahead to be able to pay for this very big and expensive bill.
Because they need to meet those numbers in order to get this passed with, 50 votes, basically. Otherwise, they need 60 and they're not going to get it. I love how you put this into two buckets, that this is a big deal. Do you know, Mel, we don't normally get into the weeds on this show, and yet here we are out in the garden. It's because this matters for those reasons you lay out. Number one, the blowing up of precedent. And then number two, this deficit thing, because Republicans used to talk a lot about it. I remember being at one of the conventions like a decade ago. People had buttons with count ups basically of how much was getting added to the deficit. The president's plan would add to that, but now we're hearing even from Elon Musk. He suggested he'd be getting out of political spending. But look what he tweeted in just the last hour, or put on X, I should say. He said every member of Congress who campaigned on reducing government spending and then voted for the biggest debt increase in history, we'll show this tweet, they should hang their head in shame. And he said they will lose their primary next year if it is the last thing I do on this earth. Now, if it wasn't the world's richest man making this threat, I think you'd look at it a little bit differently. This guy has basically unlimited money to spend on whatever primary he wants, if he wanted to. How concerned are the people you're talking to about that, about pushback if they vote for this? Or are they more worried about the president getting ticked off at him?
I mean, listen, I don't want to downplay Musk's ability to have an influence here. He has a huge war chest. He also has this huge megaphone on social media, right? He owns the platform X. But at the same time, Republicans that I'm talking to are much more worried about angering Donald Trump, getting on his bad side when it comes down to the muscle or the money. They'd rather have the muscle of Trump than the money of Elon Musk. Hallie.
Let me ask you about the Medicaid of it all, because it feels like if there's going to be a sticking point that throws this into chaos, it may very well be Medicaid, right, in these cuts to the program?
Yeah, I think if this bill does go down tonight, it's still a big if. I think it will be because of Medicaid, because of moderates like Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, their decision to take that down. You heard that with Tom Tillis in his retirement announcement, talking about how critical that is for so many states. This is going to be the issue to watch over these next few hours, Hallie.
Mel, before I let you go, what is the operative thinking on the timing of when this vote, the final vote, may happen? Do we know?
I wish I had a crystal ball. Late tonight, early tomorrow morning is our best guess. But again, that's just a guess because they can offer however many amendments they want. So we are here with our coffee, our caffeine, and all of our food ready to go.
All right, get it, girl. Appreciate that. Melanie Zanona, thank you. Let's talk about the stock market today, hitting another record, wrapping up a big comeback in the second quarter for stocks this year. Look at this, the S&P at an all-time high. Same for the NASDAQ, by the way. Both indices ending the quarter with double-digit gains. So, hey, not bad for your 401k or whatever you're invested in. The markets seem to be liking some good news on trade, with Canada scrapping this tax that it had planned on U.S. tech companies. It was supposed to go into effect today. It's not. That's a big win for President Trump. Remember, just last Friday, the president said he was ending trade negotiations with Canada because of this proposal on taxes to American companies. Christine Romans is joining us now with more.
Hallie, what a way to end the first half of the year for the stock market. Record highs here, and it really is on the back of enthusiasm that maybe peak uncertainty is behind us, that this July 9th next trade deadline might be soft and pushed forward, and that there is progress on trade. Look, the most recent progress on trade being with Canada and the United States after the president was very sharply critical of the Canadian effort to put in a digital service tax. The Canadians walked it back, and so now they are going to continue talking. Remember, when they were at the G7 in Canada recently, they agreed to try to put together their own trade deal, a new trade deal in the next 30 days. So that deadline is July 21st. There's also that July 9th deadline. Remember those Liberation Day tariffs from April? Then they were paused for 90 days. That 90 days runs out on July 9th. But again, as I said, there's hope. At least Wall Street is pricing in the hope that there won't be big new tariffs put on at that time. Of course, anything, could change. But can I show you the S&P 500? This is the stock market average that probably, or index that probably reflects what you have in your own 401k in terms of the stock part of your 401k. And you can see it was at record highs at the beginning of the year, and then it really collapsed after Liberation Day. And then as the president has paused and delayed and talked about trade in the week since, it has had a remarkable comeback, again, ending here at record highs for the year so far. Tomorrow marks the beginning of the second half. And of course, still an awful lot of work to be done on all those trade deals. Only really one is in the books here, but a lot of them, talking about frameworks, we'll see TBD. But stock markets are doing quite nicely. Back to you.
Christine Romans, thank you very much. Much more to get to here on the show, including why the new practice of paying college athletes could actually hurt women's sports in particular. The new fight that some players are trying to win for themselves. Plus, how South Korea is fighting back against the bugs literally blanketing sidewalks in part of the country. Yeah, we got that next. Sorry. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, an 82-year-old woman who was hurt in that attack in Boulder, Colorado a few weeks ago when the suspect was accused of throwing Molotov cocktails at people rallying for the release of Israeli hostages in Gaza. She has now died. Prosecutors say nearly 30 other people were hurt. The suspect is now facing additional charges, including first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty to federal hate crime charges Friday. Number 2, officials are warning today Iranian-backed groups may still carry out cyber attacks here, even with this ceasefire tentatively still in place between Israel and Iran. They say defense companies involved with Israel are most at risk. These officials say they haven't seen any suspicious activity yet, but they're warning groups with sensitive information to beef up their security. Number 3, people in South Korea dealing with a massive invasion of love bugs. Literally, they are swarming, like you see here, especially on some of these hiking trails near Seoul. The government says as it gets hotter there, South Korea is seeing more and more of these kinds of bugs during mating season. Number 4, the WNBA announcing today it's getting a little bit bigger. 3 more teams now for a record 18 franchises in all. Cleveland, Detroit, and my hometown of Philly all getting new WNBA teams over the next couple of years. This is after the league's best season ever. They had a record number of people watching, showing up to games, sold a record amount of merch. Caitlin Clark's Nike collab among them. That dropped and sold out in minutes today. Number 5, take a look. Robot soccer. Oh my God. This is where we are, man. AI-powered robots, head-to-head, 3-on-3 soccer game in Beijing. They're preparing for the World Humanoid Robot Games there in August, i.e. the World Cup for robots. If you were curious, first of all, look at that. Second of all, nobody's controlling them. There's like not a human that's controlling all of their moves. This is AI. Bonk. Oh, and an injury on the field. I mean, does it get more, futuristic? All right, we could watch this all hour. We won't, but we could. Tomorrow, the dawn of a new era in college sports because schools will finally be able to pay student athletes. That's something that's been banned for more than a century in the NCAA. But one part of this new NIL, or name, image, likeness plan, will not kick in, and that's back pay for former athletes. That's because new appeals from female players argue the settlement that opens the door to this wave of NIL deals is not fair to women. Our Maggie Vespa reports.
Charlotte North is no stranger to big goals.
Here's Charlotte North, does it again!
The 2-time National Women's Lacrosse Player of the Year and national champion turned pro and 2028 Olympic hopeful has a new goal in mind, taking on the NCAA.
That is unfair representation of the value that these female athletes have brought to universities around the country.
North is a plaintiff in one of 2 federal lawsuits challenging part of the historic House versus NCAA settlement, which for the first time ever allows for direct payments from colleges to athletes for the use of their name, image, and likeness. The idea? To let players earn cash for merch, video games, endorsements, and more, resulting in an estimated $20 million in revenue sharing each year moving forward. But it also includes $2.8 billion in back pay for roughly 400,000 former athletes. North says it's that second bucket that's out of bounds because while it's up to the schools, underestimates for how revenue will be divvied up for current athletes this coming school year, men's sports get the 4 largest pieces of the pie, with football and basketball getting more than 90% combined. The top listed women's sport, basketball, which in 5th place gets 1.1%. Payouts for former athletes are expected to mirror these amounts.
It is a deep violation of Title IX.
Title IX is the federal law barring sex-based discrimination on college campuses. North says to get the back paycheck, she had to waive her rights under that law. Another plaintiff, Lexi Drum, wasn't impressed with the amount she was expected to get.
I think it was around $400. Was my estimate.
Drum doesn't deny certain sports rake in more money, but she argues Title IX is clear.
I think that male athletes and female athletes did the same thing. They woke up for the same workouts, attended the same games, attended the same classes. The only thing different was the amount of fans at their game.
In a statement to NBC News, the NCAA called the settlement a massive win for student athletes, saying the injunction set by the court and agreed to by the NCAA, defendant conferences, and student athlete plaintiffs provide significant stability to college sports and enable schools to provide direct financial benefits to student athletes, totaling nearly 50% of athletics department revenue. North says it's about leaving college sports better for those who come next.
I feel passionately that this needs to be fixed.
And for Drum, who plans to work as a lawyer focusing on Title IX discrimination, it's about leveling the playing field long term.
For so long as a female athlete, you're told, just be happy that you're here. Just be happy that you're playing. And you just settle for the scraps. Now, this is an opportunity where we see that we deserve more, and that push for more, gives us a bigger seat at the table.
A bigger seat, they hope, comes with bigger pay.
Maggie Vespa is joining us now. Maggie, it's super interesting. Talk through this sort of specific formula that these plaintiffs want. They're not saying, like, oh, let's split it 50-50, right?
No, they're not. They have a specific formula, and really specifically, they're focusing on 2 categories of funding kind of within the broader NIL bucket because it's broken down in categories, and they call those categories the broadcast compensation and the athlete service compensation. And what you have to know about that is that basically it's money the schools pay directly. It's not like a third-party deal, like a video game or something. And they want it paid out based on the ratio of men to women in the larger athlete pool any given year. So figure next year you have say 60% men. They want the men to get 60% of those funding buckets. The 40% of women will get the 40%. That's their pitch. However this plays out, Hallie, it's worth noting the judge who oversaw this case and oversaw the kind of formulation of this settlement heard Title IX related arguments as this was being sort of cobbled together and decided to still let the settlement come together as is, saying that this at its heart is an antitrust case, saying the NCAA kind of had a monopoly, a chokehold on the industry of college athletes and was violating antitrust laws. So that being said, she let it come together, but left the door open to future Title IX settlements or challenges, which is effectively what we're seeing play out now. Hallie.
Maggie Vespa, fascinating. Thank you very much for staying on top of this one for us. Appreciate it. Coming up, a dramatic rescue in the middle of the ocean. Have you seen this? The moment a dad jumped in to save a daughter, a little girl, after she went overboard on a Disney cruise. It makes your heart stop. We've got the video. Plus, what may have been behind this huge train derailment in Wisconsin. Some 20 cars flipped. That's next. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Midwest bureau, a small plane crash in Ohio killed all 6 people on board. Officials say it happened right after takeoff, right in the middle of the woods. The NTSB and FAA are now investigating. Also out of our Midwest bureau, take a look at this scene out of Wisconsin. A train derailment spilled thousands of gallons of diesel. Fortunately, nobody was badly hurt. First responders are now working to clean everything up while the train company investigates. And out of our Northeast bureau, a stray wind turbine blade ended up blocking, look at that, multiple lanes of traffic in Maryland earlier today. It closed down the lanes in both directions. That's like bigger than you would think it would be, right? Crews eventually managed to pull the blade out of traffic and they got the roads reopened. Apparently a truck had been carrying the blade, like on the back of the truck. Obviously it wasn't supposed to end up in the middle of the road, so they're looking into that. We're also tonight just getting stunning new pictures in of the moment workers on a Disney cruise rescued, basically a hero who jumped into the ocean to save a little girl when she fell overboard. Here it is. You can see this small rescue boat. This is on a Disney cruise ship. So the crew heads out to go save a father and a daughter. Okay, so it's going out. You're about to show you here. There's like two tiny little heads that are peeking out from the surface there. You see it? That's where they are. They've been treading water. He jumped in. They start treading water. Apparently, she's only about 5 years old. She fell off the fourth desk. So if you watch this, I'm going to leave this up for a second because that little boat goes out there. I know this video is tough to see, but you can imagine everybody on the cruise ship like pulled out their phones to record this. They end up, after all that time, I mean, they're in the middle of the ocean. They pulled them on board. It is just not clear how this happened, but obviously this is a dramatic story that has gripped a lot of people across the country. George Solis is live for us from Fort Lauderdale now. George, how did this happen? What do we know about this family and how they're doing now?
Yeah, Hallie, it is a wild story and certainly a lot of talk about this, especially that video that you just showed. This happened on the fourth floor deck of the ship. It's just below some of the boats there. It's an area that is actually open to the public. It's an area that's actually made for running. And so it's not clear, according to Disney, how this child went overboard or this individual that went in after her. What is clear is, of course, the swift response by the Disney cruise ship. They not only put out an alert, people were hearing over the loudspeaker a call of Mr. Mob, which a lot of people were like, well, what the heck is that? It was a signal that there was a person overboard, a man overboard. And so at this point, the cruise ship crew goes on these boats. They go out there, they rescue them. It leads to this dramatic rescue, and a lot of people, of course, pulling out their phones, watching this whole thing unfold. Disneyline Cruises, for its part, issuing a statement that I'll read in part about this dramatic rescue, just briefly saying that they were obviously grateful to the crew and the swift action that they took to bring these people to safety after they were stranded out there. Now, this cruise ship was actually on its way back from the Bahamas here to Fort Lauderdale. It didn't stop. It continued forward here. Tonight, unfortunately, we don't know the condition of that rescuer and that child, but based on what passengers told us, they seemed unharmed, which is miraculous when you consider even at the fourth floor deck, Hallie, that is still a significant drop. This happened during daylight hours, fortunately, and it made it a little bit easier for those crews to go out there and rescue them, Hallie.
It's also really shining a spotlight on cruise safety more broadly, right?
Absolutely. I mean, people still don't know the full play-by-play of how this occurred. I mean, these railings are designed by law to be high enough that a child can't just fall over. There's also plexiglass here. So still many questions left to be unanswered. But again, a lot of people just fortunate that for now, this story seems to have resolved with a happy ending, Hallie.
Oh, God, it's just so scary to even look at, though, some of those images of those little, those little figures in the middle of that big ocean. It's a good thing they are okay. George Solis, thank you. Coming up here on the show, the new record already broken at Wimbledon before a single tennis match has even begun. We're taking you to this record hot turf next. Parts of Europe tonight in the middle of a record-breaking heat wave with dozens of wildfires burning across Turkey and France. Look at that. You can see that helicopter kind of carving its way through the smoke there. Some 50,000 people have had to evacuate. This is on top of that brutal heat wave in that area. And it made for the hottest opening day ever at Wimbledon. The tournament starting today in London. But guess what? It was like in the 90s plus today. So hot that they're putting in place this rule that they very rarely use that lets players call for like what's effectively a 10-minute break every so often if the heat and humidity get too high. I want to bring in Stephen Romo, who's joining us now. That's how dramatic the heat is in Europe right now, that it's affecting even Wimbledon, right?
Yeah, it is a very big deal for them, Hallie. Some unprecedented heat for them on this first day. Highs around 34 degrees Celsius, which I dutifully looked up. That's about 93 degrees Fahrenheit. When they're out there in the sun, you can imagine how that is, not just on the players, but on the spectators. Some of the players are more used to this. They play in tournaments like the Australian Open. They deal with a lot of heat in those situations. Spectators, not quite as prepared. They had their handheld fans, their water, their big hats, but still there was at least one person who did have to get medical attention due to that heat. And you mentioned the heat policy. The tournament did implement that rule, allowing players to get those 10 minutes to go and take a break and cool off. They're not allowed to get any coaching or medical care during that 10 minutes, but that 10 minutes can really help them lower their body temperature so they can get out there and start playing. And it's already been an interesting start, Hallie.
What about this new rule this year, Wimbledon first? No line judges because they're using like electronic calling, right? How has that impacted things so far?
Yeah, a sign of the times. There were actually a couple protesters out there that had signs saying that AI is taking over some more jobs. The system is known as Hawkeye. It uses at least 10 different cameras to watch those lines. It can cost up to $100,000 for each court, but it's actually been in use for a really long time, since about 2007. They've used it to check the human calls. So if there's a question about the human call, they would go and look at Hawkeye. But now those humans are out of the way, and the robots are taking over that aspect of it this year, Hallie.
All right, before we let you go here, Steve, just real quick, the superstars to watch, a modern rivalry, if you will, on the court, right? Especially for the world ranked #1, these two women. Talk us through it.
Yeah, Coco Gauff and Aryna Sabalenka. This rivalry started earlier this month in the French Open. Sabalenka seemed to say that it was just her poor playing and the conditions and not Coco Gauff's skill that led to her loss. But it seems like they made up. They were in a TikTok video together. They also posted about the olive branch being extended and accepted. So looks like that off-the-court rivalry has cooled off. Of course, we'll see what happens on the court as things continue with Wimbledon.
Stephen Romo, thank you for that update. Appreciate it. That does it for us for this hour. Thank you, as always, for watching. More coverage starts right now. Coming on the air tonight with the new details just into us on the suspect on that deadly Idaho ambush that left 2 firefighters dead. What we're learning about this person who reportedly shot at firefighters and who reportedly dreamed of becoming one himself, coming up. Then the new jury drama behind closed doors in the Diddy case. What we're learning about the juror accused of not following the rules right as they began to deliberate. We'll take you live outside the courthouse. Plus, what is actually in that mega bill that the Senate's debating right now, filled with big tax cuts and a hefty price tag? We're breaking down that so-called big, beautiful bill, as the president puts it, and Republicans push to get it passed. And the new twist in the new era of NIL, why some female athletes say one key part of these deals to pay athletes is actually unfair to women, even as it transforms college campuses. Then the dramatic rescue at sea, the moment a father jumped into the ocean to save a little girl who went overboard on a Disney cruise. It'll make your heart stop. That is coming up a little bit later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and we are coming on the air with the latest details just into us from Idaho in just the last 30 minutes or so on that investigation into a deadly ambush on firefighters that responded to a brush fire and ended up taking gunshots. 2 firefighters killed. Here's what we know. Police have ID'd the suspected shooter, 20 years old. They say that he wanted to become a firefighter himself one day. Listen to this.
We have information that he at one time wanted to be a firefighter. So we don't know if there's a nexus to that desire and what happened yesterday, but there is information that we've received that he at one time wanted to be a firefighter.
Now, that's the Kootenai County Sheriff right there who just gave this briefing in really just the last 45 minutes, not even. He says they're still looking into the motive behind the attack. Right now, they don't have one. They don't think there's a connection to terrorism, but they actually had a few interactions with this suspect before, 5 of them. Minor, they say, nothing major, but he has no known criminal history. Remember, this is somebody who allegedly started the fire near Coeur d'Alene Sunday, luring first responders to the scene and then shooting them before officials say he then died by suicide. You're about to hear some of the really scary moments from a police scanner call coming in from the scene. Listen.
Law enforcement right now, there's an active shooter zone. They're shot. BC3's down, BC1's down. Everybody shot up here.
It's chilling to hear that. Everybody shot up here, he says. 2 firefighters killed, a third seriously hurt, but now apparently in stable condition. I want to bring in our investigative correspondent, Tom Winter, as well as our correspondent based on the West Coast, Camila Bernal now. Tom, let me start with you here because we're getting a number of details coming into us, not just these questions around how he wanted to be a firefighter, but then allegedly carried out this attack, but about him climbing trees, apparently, shooting from there, coming from a family of arborists, et cetera. Help us understand some of what we've just learned.
Yeah, Hallie. So the details on this individual identified by police is Wesley Val Rowley, born in May 1st, 2005. No prior contacts with law enforcement from a standpoint of arrest. He did have those 5 interactions with local police. They said that involved trespassing or wellness check. I think that's an important detail because when you look at these cases and see that somebody's asking for a wellness check on an individual, it clearly means that they have no other way of contacting them and they're concerned about their well-being and safety. So that does speak a little bit perhaps to his state of mind as well as his vehicle and the condition it was uncovered in. But let's take a step back here. This incident happened approximately 4:30 Eastern time yesterday afternoon. And the new details that we received just in the last hour or so is that in fact, he had an interaction, apparently with the firefighters that initially arrived. They asked him a question about his vehicle, and then the shooting starts at some point after that. Police say they disabled his vehicle once they got up there, kind of pushed it down a ditch so that he couldn't go back and get it as they searched for him. They also shot out or disabled the tires of the fire trucks and fire engines that were up there as a result of them just responding to this initially as a fire call before it became obviously an active shooter situation. Some of the details here bring in from the information received last night. Federal law enforcement using a piece of electronic to be able to determine what cell phones were active in the area. They can then see what cell phones are moving around physically, geographically, and then they notice that this particular cell phone, which they now say belongs to this individual, was not moving. And at that point, they realize this is probably the person that they're looking for. But no motive, still trying to get some more details about what happened here, but obviously they've at least been able to put together some of the pieces, Hallie.
Tom, thank you very much. Camila, let me go to you here because this is somebody who I guess had some connections to the community, but also had addresses outside the state as well. Do we know anything about why Coeur d'Alene?
Well, we know that this is the area where he lived, at least he lived in Idaho. Authorities saying that they believe that he lived out of his car, which is why there's such emphasis in trying to process his car and trying to find exactly what was in there. And you obviously mentioned the fact that he grew up in an arborist family and that he knew how to climb these trees. The photo that authorities put out just this last hour shows him essentially in a hunting outfit with a song that's called Hunter. And so that's part of what authorities are putting out there in terms of looking and trying to get information from people in terms of the motive as to why exactly he was there, why he did what he did. We know, according to authorities and according to his grandfather, that he wanted to be a firefighter. Authorities not necessarily pointing to the motive, but they are saying that he lived in different states, that he did want to be a firefighter, that they're looking into all of these things. So no clarity as to why he picked that particular spot other than the fact that we do know this was a wooded area. This was a difficult area for law enforcement, actually, as they tried to figure out where the shots were coming from, as they were trying to find him and figure out exactly what was happening. Hallie?
Yeah, Camila, thank you very much for that. Tom, before I let you go, you know, we should note, and Camila point, the brush fire is still going. Yeah. They're investigating essentially a double homicide at this point, and with a third firefighter that's obviously still being treated at the hospital here. It's just such a difficult situation, and you kind of heard that from the sheriff today.
Yeah, it is, Hallie, because one of the challenges here, they're investigating some fragments that they found at the scene. So they're wondering, was there a second rifle or a second gun that was used in the course of this shooting or in the course of this incident? So that's the first thing they're trying to determine. And one of the challenges when you've got a fire like this is that it can kind of cook off around. Basically, you know, you could lose the type of evidence that you would be looking for to be able to trace things back. Certainly, if he left behind any sort of writings, if he left behind, they say they haven't found any. His vehicle, apparently he had been living in. They've recovered that, or at least some signs that he was living into it. So they want to go through that car. They still haven't had a chance to. And then they also need to try to figure out, you know, did he leave any sort of clothing behind? Is there a wallet that was left behind? All those type of things could be important clues as to why this individual did this, and just to make sure that nobody else was helping him before the event, even though, of course, they've said they believe he's the solo suspect.
Tom Winter. Camila Bernal, thank you very much for that reporting. I appreciate that. Let's bring it to New York now with some new drama in the Diddy trial going down behind closed doors tonight inside the jury room. Because as the jury now has this sex trafficking case, as they've begun deliberations, as they've just sent another note about an hour ago to the judge, they're saying that one of the jurors apparently is not following instructions. They sent this note. You see it. They pointed the finger at juror number 3. This is all we know. Like, we don't know any other specifics beyond this. So there were some tense moments as the court waited for the judge to decide what to do. He ended up sending back his own note. He said, you see it, I remind you of the need to deliberate and to follow the law, reminding the jury it is their obligation to listen to his instructions. As this all was happening outside the jury room, our team at the courthouse tells us Diddy was up. He was talking with his family. At one point, he was holding up books in front of him for the press and for the public to see. The power of positive thinking and the happiness advantage clearly meant to send a message. Remember, Sean Combs is facing 5 counts on charges including sex trafficking and racketeering. He has pleaded not guilty, and his defense team says all the sexual encounters he had were consensual. Rahima Ellis is outside court for us in New York. Interesting to see this jury note and the others that were sent later in the day, Rahima, because there really are only indication, people are reading the tea leaves, there are only indication of what this jury could possibly be talking about behind closed doors.
Absolutely, Hallie. And we want to put some context to what we suspect might be going on. Excuse me. This is the verdict sheet. And number 1 in the verdict sheet, it says count 1. It is racketeering conspiracy. And do you find the defendant not guilty or guilty? Hallie, this is important. If and only if, I'm reading here from the verdict sheet, you find the defendant guilty of count 1, which types of racketeering acts do you unanimously find were involved in the offense? There are 8 different types. You go to the second page, type number 8 is acts involving drug distribution. Now, here's the point. The jury sent a question to the judge about drug distribution, and it said, referring to page 37, if a recipient asks for controlled substances and hands to the requester, is the individual the distributor? What does that mean? What is the jury considering? Have they answered question number 1 and are looking for something of whether they proved or not proved it? We are not reading anything into this. What we are doing is sharing what was going on in that deliberation room that spilled out into the courtroom and became a question for the judge. He didn't answer it tonight, but he told the jurors, go home, 5 o'clock, come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and he will have a response for them. We don't know whether it's the response that they're looking for, but he is going to give a response. Hallie?
Rahima, is the jury sequestered or can they go about their business? Are we expecting to see Diddy back in court tomorrow? Like, does he have to be there every day? How does this work? And what was his demeanor like? I mean, we talked a little bit about those books, which was sort of an interesting moment, too.
The jury is not sequestered. The jury is not sequestered. They can go about their day, but they are told, do not read, talk about, listen to radio reports, watch news reports of anything that pertains to this case. They want the jury to stay untainted, if you will, in terms of opinions about what might be going on. You can bet that Sean Diddy Combs will be back in this courtroom right behind me tomorrow. He's been here every single day for the nearly 2 months that the trial has gone on. And today, his family was with him. His children were with him. His mother was with him. When he walked into the courtroom, he was smiling. He hugged his defense attorneys. He looked at his family. He smiled at them. He raised his hands in the prayer motion, and he put his hand to his heart. He apparently is feeling that this is a moment that he's been waiting for and that it's going to come out the way he wants it to. We will see. Hallie?
Rahima Ellis covering every minute of it for us live outside court there in New York. Rahima, thank you. Got to get to some breaking news just into us now as well. Some of the biggest airports in the country are experiencing some massive delays because of really intense weather. We've got Bill Cairns with the forecast, but I want to get to Tom Costello, who has made his way to Newark. Tom, what's going on? Is this a bigger deal than usual?
Well, listen, it is because we're in this very busy holiday travel week, right? So this is crunch time. Take a look behind me, and you can see the lines here at Newark have been building dramatically over the last hour or so. We've now got a ground stop in effect here at Newark, another one in effect at LaGuardia, also Philadelphia, all because of a pretty big weather system of severe weather here in the New York City area. Also, Houston right now is under a ground stop. Let me just put on my glasses because I want to read to you the FAA report. Specifically, due to weather, thunderstorms, and thunderstorms in the area, they're now looking at traffic arriving for Newark is now averaging a delay of 3 hours, 17 minutes. That's inbound flights into Newark, now averaging a delay of more than 3 hours. And that means, of course, outbound, if you don't have a flight coming in, you can't go out again, right? So the outbound flights, I looked at the status board a short time ago. We're talking about delays of 2, 3, 4, 5 hours because of the severe weather. Hallie, as it happens, Jay Blackman and I, my producer, we were today shooting here at Newark Airport, and we were behind the scenes. And the United Airlines folks were saying, you know, we have bad weather coming in today. This could be a very rough evening. And sure enough, that's exactly what's happening. Separately, also in Houston, I may have mentioned that, but Houston also dealing with some ground delays because of weather there. JFK Airport on a delay, not a stop. So again, all New York City airports are affected by this right now, but Newark right now averaging delays of 163 minutes, LaGuardia 156 minutes, Philadelphia 150 minutes right now averaging delays. It's that kind of season, you know, Hallie.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's interesting because I talk to the weather experts at the airlines, and I always say, which do you prefer, a summer storm or a winter storm? Which is easier to handle in terms of airplane flow? And they all say, listen, we'd rather deal with a winter storm anytime than a summer storm because of the volatility of the weather and, of course, lightning. And you can't have people working out on the ramps on the runways with lightning. You pull them back. They always say it's just like the kids at the pool, right? If lightning's coming down, you get them out. That's exactly the situation here.
Man, Tom, that's so interesting. Thank you for bringing us up to speed on that, on what, as you rightly note, is a busy travel week. Let me bring in Bill Cairns now. What's up with the weather, my man? What's going on? I thought it was supposed to be good weather when we get towards the 4th.
It will be. Much of this week is going to be fine. And, you know, this is a little bit of a head scratcher. So Philadelphia had the thunderstorms. No doubt about it. You know, they had the worst of it. But then as the storms were drifting northwards, all of the New York airports were like, uh-oh, we can't have planes coming here. These thunderstorms are coming our way. So that's when they put all the ground stops into effect. They told all the planes that were heading to New York, you got to stay where you are. You can't take off. And that's why we have all these issues going on. But these storms have considerably weakened on their way to New York. New York doesn't even have thunderstorms, but yet the airports are shut down just in case they thought they were going to get them. So that's what Tom was saying. The thunderstorms, it's just such a wild card if they were going to fall apart or not. And you can see on this map here, there's no red. There's no lightning strikes at all. There were a couple near Newark. You can see them there, but now they've dried up. But JFK and LaGuardia, they're not even going to barely even get much in the way of even rainfall out of this. So here's a closer view. And this is where Newark Airport is located right in here. And they did have a little bit of brief heavy rain, but nothing that you'd expect that's causing all the problems that we're having out there. The good news about Philadelphia, that is now clear. There's no thunderstorms in the area, so they should be getting that airport going. The only other airport I'm going to worry about in the next half hour or so, Pittsburgh, you have thunderstorms with lightning coming through. You're probably going to get a brief ground stop there. Cleveland, it looks like some of those showers just passed through, and you'll be doing okay. And the good news is that much of the rest of the country's fine, Hallie. The bad news for the East Coast is tomorrow we do this all over again, and it'll be probably worse than what we're dealing with now. Up and down the East Coast, almost all of the major airports are going to have a line of thunderstorms move through at this time tomorrow. Gusty winds, small hail. I'm sure they'll get brief holds at all the airports, and that's why we're going to be concerned there. Just by the time we get to Wednesday, it'll be in Florida. So, Hallie, it's one of those better safe than sorry cases where they just, they said, just in case, let's shut everything down in the New York airports, all 3 of them. And
got to be safe, though, you know.
They have to do it. They can't risk lives.
That's totally right. No, you're right. Bill Cairns, glad to have you with us this week. Appreciate you. Let's bring you back here to Washington because only about 6 blocks from where I'm sitting, there is plenty of action at the Capitol as Senate Republicans try to push through President Trump's multi-trillion-dollar mega bill. Right now, they're in the middle of this marathon voting session that they call the Votorama in Senate colloquialisms. They're voting on amendments, including one that would basically blow up precedent on the way the Senate calculates the price tag on stuff like this. That has Democrats throwing the flag. They're accusing Republicans of magic math to make sure the numbers add up correctly. More on that in just a second. Remember, though, this Votorama, this is not the final vote, right? We are not at the final vote just yet. Until that happens, which may be overnight, which may be tomorrow morning, a lot could change on what is in and out of this massive bill. But for now, here's a look at what it means for you and your tax dollars so far in the breakdown. To the president, it's gorgeous.
We call it a great, big, beautiful bill because that's what it is.
But to Democrats, an ugly betrayal.
The bill before the Senate is utter poison.
940 pages that make up the foundation of President Trump's agenda. So what's actually in it? Start with tax cuts, a huge piece of this plan. As written, the bill would make the president's signature 2017 cuts permanent.
It's been an amazing experience.
The bill would also let people deduct more of their state and local income taxes for the next 5 years, which Republicans from blue states with higher taxes really wanted. And it would fulfill a Trump campaign promise by implementing no tax on tips, overtime, or car loans. On other issues, the bill boosts spending on immigration enforcement with more money for the border wall and for ICE. It beefs up military spending, including money for space programs and moving the historic Space Shuttle Discovery from blue-leaning Virginia to ruby-red Texas.
The shuttle has cleared the tower.
And it calls for funding the so-called Golden Dome, a U.S. air missile defense system. But all those tax cuts and extra spending are expensive. So how's it being paid for?
We're cutting $1.7 trillion in this bill, and you're not going to feel any of it.
Critics say that's not even close to being true, considering the cuts the bill calls for to social safety nets that lower-income Americans rely on, with even some Republicans who voted to move the bill forward concerned.
If we're going to be a working class party, we've got to protect working people. And I just, the Medicaid stuff in here, I think is bad.
New requirements and restrictions for Medicaid could make it harder to earn its benefits, effectively, experts say, kicking people off. A new estimate predicts more than 10 million Americans would lose their health insurance.
We're not talking about living this life of luxury with Medicaid. We are honestly talking about this life and death and how do we provide for our child in our home.
And the bill also makes changes to the SNAP program, or food stamps, to save billions. It gets rid of green energy and environmental credits, too. Democrats sounding the alarm.
I will tell you that this is the most dangerous piece of legislation I've ever seen during my time in Congress.
But many Republicans ready to celebrate.
I think it's going to be a beautiful day for the big, beautiful bill.
That is, of course, if it passes. Let me bring in our Melanie Zanona, who's joining us now from Capitol Hill. So we laid out what's in it, Mel. Let me just start with sort of where we are. 6:20 Eastern time. They're still talking amendments. They're still in vote-a-rama. When? Do we know when they're actually going to vote? Is that still TBD? What can you tell us?
Unfortunately, we don't have a time for when they're going to have the final passage vote. I will say they are moving at an extremely glacial pace right now. I believe we're only on the 15th amendment. They started this process at 9 a.m. Lawmakers can offer an unlimited number of amendments. There could still be dozens to go. Susan Collins joking to reporters moments ago that there's still a gazillion amendments to go through. Not actually a gazillion, but we're in for a long night, potentially into the early morning.
I'm sorry, but is there a time cap on this?
No, there's no time cap. There's no requirement that they have to cut themselves off. Really, it's when they tire themselves out, tucker themselves out, and decide that they're done and that they want to move to a final passage vote. And because they actually got a good night's sleep last night instead of working through the night last night, Democrats are rested. They're trying to make this as politically painful as possible for Republicans. They can't stop this bill ultimately, but they can drag it out, and they can force Republicans to take a number of politically difficult votes on Medicaid cuts, on tax breaks for the wealthy, on cuts to food stamps, a whole host of issues. And we have seen a few examples where Republicans like Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins have crossed party lines to join with Democrats. Now, none of these amendments, we should point out, have been adopted. So these are messenger votes. These are show votes. But later tonight, we are expecting some more important amendments that actually could get adopted and that could shape the future of this bill and the trajectory of this bill. In fact, Speaker Mike Johnson said he's been in contact with his Senate counterparts, and he is imploring them to adopt a final amendment that makes the bill look closer to the House product. Because right now, Hallie, I've been checking in with GOP leadership sources. They say the vibes are really bad right now. They are very worried that if the Senate passes something, it's not going to pass the House.
Okay, which is so interesting because as of yesterday, I had talked to a high-level source who suggested that if it does pass the Senate, they would be feeling good. This is more on the White House side. They would be feeling good about it getting through the House. Things change so quickly, though. Yeah. The way you're talking about this, Mel, though, I just have to ask, like, is there any chance that you could see enough Republicans tank this bill altogether, or does that seem to be off the table? I know we're like process and procedure. I promise we'll get to the meat of this, but I just have to know.
I would have said in the Senate, a couple days ago, I would have said it's very unlikely that we're going to see enough Republicans band together. But that Tom Tillis, a stunning retirement announcement over the weekend, where he said he's voting against the bill, and then he later announced he's retiring. I think anything is possible in this moment. I'm thinking back to the debate over trying to repeal Obamacare back in 2017, and that's that shocking moment when the late Senator John McCain delivered the infamous thumbs down on the Senate floor. I think anything is possible in this moment. They are feeling confident that they'll at least be able to pass the Senate, but I think there are real big problems brewing in the House. Maybe it doesn't pass by July 4th. I think ultimately they pass something, but this timeline right now is looking very difficult to achieve.
So let's talk about then what underpins some of the consternation around this, at least some of the part of maybe some of those Republicans. So much of it, Mel, revolves around Medicaid. It feels to me like if anything blows up this thing, it's going to be the cuts to that program.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The CBO, the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, estimates that 11.8 million Americans are going to lose their health insurance because of cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, the Affordable Care Act. And remember, Donald Trump himself said he did not want to see any cuts to Medicaid. Many Republicans said they were uneasy with cuts to Medicaid. Most of them have fallen in line, but the reality is a lot of people are going to lose their health insurance if this bill becomes law. And so there are some moderates, particularly in some of these tougher districts, in some of these purple battlegrounds, that know that passing this bill is a death sentence for them politically. So they're trying to protect their constituents, but they also don't want to get on Trump's bad side. I think Medicaid is the stickiest issue, and it's going to be the biggest one politically in terms of it being a problem for Republicans.
Melanie Zanona, never a dull. Enjoy the evening. What's on tap for the late night dinner for you guys?
I believe we just ordered tacos. They haven't arrived yet, but we're waiting. Yeah.
Well, enjoy your Surfside. Mel, thank you very much. Appreciate you. Let's take it to the stock market today, rising to another record with a big comeback here in the second quarter for stocks so far this year. Look at this. S&P at a new all-time high. Same for the NASDAQ, right? Both indices are ending this quarter with double-digit gains, with the markets liking some of this good news on trade out of Canada. That's because Canada scrapped a tax it had been planning on American tech companies. This tax that was supposed to go into effect today. Late last night, they pulled the plug, and in doing so, gave President Trump a pretty big win. Remember, it was only a few days ago that the president says he was ending all trade negotiations with Canada because of this proposal to tax tech firms here. Christine Romans is joining us now with more.
What a way to end the first half of the year for the stock market. Record highs here, and it really is on the back of enthusiasm that maybe peak uncertainty is behind us, that this July 9th next trade deadline might be soft and pushed forward, and that there is progress on trade. Look, the most recent progress on trade being with Canada and the United States after the president was very sharply critical of the Canadian effort to put in a digital service tax. The Canadians walked it back, and so now they are going to continue talking. Remember, when they were at the G7 in Canada recently, they agreed to try to put together their own trade deal, a new trade deal in the next 30 days. So that deadline is July 21st. There's also that July 9th deadline. Remember those Liberation Day tariffs from April? Then they were paused for 90 days. That 90 days runs out on July 9th. But again, as I said, there's hope. At least Wall Street is pricing in the hope that there won't be big new tariffs put on at that time. Of course, anything, could change. But can I show you the S&P 500? This is the stock market average that probably, or index that probably reflects what you have in your own 401k in terms of the stock part of your 401k. And you can see it was at record highs at the beginning of the year, and then it really collapsed after Liberation Day. And then as the president has paused and delayed and talked about trade in the week since, it has had a remarkable comeback, again, ending here at record highs for the year so far. Tomorrow marks the beginning of the second half. And of course, still an awful lot of work to be done on all those trade deals. Only really one is in the books here, but a lot of them, talking about frameworks, we'll see TBD. But stock markets are doing quite nicely. Back to you.
Our thanks to Christine Romans for that. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, an 82-year-old woman who was hurt in an attack in Boulder, Colorado a few weeks ago has died. Remember, the suspect in that attack is accused of throwing Molotov cocktails at people who were rallying for the release of Israeli hostages in Gaza. Prosecutors say nearly 30 other people were hurt. The suspect is now facing additional charges, including first-degree murder, because of this news. He has pleaded not guilty to federal hate crime charges. That happened on Friday. Number 2, crews are battling multiple fires in Southern California today. Take a look at this. Evacuation orders in place in several spots as firefighters are working to contain them. We'll show you that in just a little bit, but it is a significant blow to an area that has obviously been decimated by fire. Let's take you overseas to South Korea for number 3, where they're dealing with a huge, look at that, invasion of love bugs. They've appeared in literal swarms. Look at that. I mean, people are shoveling them out. Ugh. Especially on some of these hiking trails near Seoul. The government says as temperatures get hotter, as it just gets hotter generally in South Korea, they are seeing more and more of these bugs during mating season. Number 4, the WNBA announcing today it is expanding, adding 3 more teams for a record 18 franchises. If you're wondering, those new teams are heading to Cleveland, to Detroit, and to Philly over the next few years, specifically over the next 3 to 5 years, according to the WNBA. It follows the league's best season yet, with record views, so more people than ever watching, more people than ever showing up at games, merch sales way up. And that merch includes Caitlin Clark's Nike collaboration, which dropped and sold out in minutes today. Number 5, take a look at these AI-powered robots going head-to-head in a 3-on-3 soccer game in Beijing. Oh, my God, you guys. Like, this is, okay, so these robots, it's basically they're getting ready for the World Humanoid Robot Games in August. That's a World Cup for robots, essentially. No human is controlling these moves here. So these are just humanoid bots. You see the ref like pulling them off each other that are just like playing soccer based on AI. Oh, little injury, had to come off the field. We're just living in this world, man. This is it. Maybe you're staring into the abyss of the future, perhaps. Very interesting, though. Very watchable. Also tonight, the State Department is now banning a British punk band for what they've said on stage in the UK. We've got the details and much more coming up in the show next. We've got major breaking news to bring you now. Developments out of Idaho, where we're learning there appears to be a plea deal for the man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students in 2022. This is according to an attorney for the family of one of the victims here. Now, we're talking about Bryan Kohberger. You see him here. A court hearing for that change of plea is expected to happen on Wednesday. This is a very big deal, considering how high profile this case has been. Kohberger is accused of stabbing and killing these 4 University of Idaho students, Zana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Ethan Chapin. Now, Gonsalves' family posting online in just the last couple of minutes just this statement saying, "It's true. We are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us." They go on to say, "Please give us some time. This was very unexpected. We appreciate all of your love and support." I want to bring in NBC's Camila Bernal, our legal analyst, Danny Savalos, who's joining us as well. Camila, let me start with you. We want to be very careful as this is coming in literally the last 90 seconds or so. What do we know and what are we waiting to find out as it relates to what appears to be now a discussion about a plea deal this week for Bryan Kohberger?
Yeah, it appears to be a plea deal, but it's not a done deal yet until the judge says that it is. So we have to be careful in that sense, too, in terms of what happens next with the judge. And I think part of why the family says that they are so angry is because they have been waiting for this trial. They were ready to begin this trial this summer, and they've been fighting over and over again to get accountability here. And I think they were looking forward to this trial this summer. The defense team here, they have been trying to get rid of all of the evidence, essentially, that prosecutors have gathered for this case. The most important being the DNA linking Bryan Kohberger to the scene, because they did find his DNA on the knife sheath. They, of course, also had cell phone records and emails, his Amazon purchases, so much evidence that a lot of it still hasn't even been made public because of that gag order. And of course, everybody was getting ready for that trial this summer. If this does happen and Bryan Kohberger takes this plea deal, we won't be seeing a lot of what the families and a lot of people were looking forward to seeing in court. And so that's why I think the family is upset about all of this. The defense team, they tried to push this trial to happen later because they were saying they just did not have enough time. They had tried to point the finger at someone else, the judge also saying no to that. So it's been a long road to get to where we are today. Remember, the students were killed in November of 2022, and we were getting close to that trial. We'll see what happens this week, but it appears we won't get there, Hallie.
That's right. Jury selection next month, trial in August. Camila, thanks. I'm going to ask you to stand by, but I want to bring in, Danny, before we get to you on the phone, our NBC News legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett, who has been covering this case closely for years now. Laura, thank you for being with us. So we keep saying if this is accepted, that is because a judge would have to sign off on this plea deal, right?
That's right. And so the biggest role that a judge has in a case like this, Hallie, is making sure that a defendant like Bryan Kohberger, especially given the stakes for him, that he's doing this knowing and voluntary, that nobody pressured him into it, that his attorney advised him of all of the risks involved in going to trial, and that he made his own independent assessment, of course, with his attorney's help, but that he made his own decision in this case, and it wasn't coerced. And so the judges typically, in almost every jurisdiction, ask them a series of questions to assess that voluntariness and try to suss out whether or not he really understands what he's doing. Now, given the gravity of what he was facing, the death penalty, you can understand why he could say, you know what, looking at all the evidence here, looking at the fact that the judge just refused to accept an alternative perpetrator defense, looking at the fact that the judge has basically denied every single one of the sort of meaty motions that he's filed in recent months trying to, bolster his defense. The judge has basically shot them all down. And so if I'm his defense attorney, I'm laying all of that out for him going into this trial. And so you can understand why he may decide, look, I'm not going to risk the death penalty. What's more interesting is why the state did this now.
Yeah.
We're just a couple weeks out from trial, given that all that the families have been put through. And I think that's sort of the context and background for why you might see the Gonsalves family say this is something that they find abhorrent, is just given everything they've been put through now to have the state do this, that might be where they're coming from on that. But again, we're going to have to understand the details. We're going to have to understand, does this, usually with something like this, he doesn't have a right to an appeal. So once he accepts this, it's over. It's done. He can't, then turn around and change his mind in a couple weeks. It would be over, and he would lose his right to do anything to contest it, which means he would be behind bars for the rest of his life. He wouldn't have the death penalty, but there would be no avenue for him. There would be no more relief for him. It would be the end of the road.
Laura, you mentioned that statement that was on the Gonsalves family Facebook page here, in which they are, it appears, incredibly upset at the word that this has come in. Beyond furious is the quote here. In a situation like this, Laura, would the judge take into account any victim opposition here? Is that something that comes into play as the judge is making a decision on this, if in fact the state, the prosecutors had said that they would like to move forward?
So I've seen that when it comes to sentencing. I haven't seen that type of thing come in when it comes to the question of whether or not Bryan Kohberger, his decision to accept such an offer is knowing and voluntary, right? It's a kind of a different question.
I see.
And if the question is coming down to like whether or not this is good for Kohberger, right? Because he's the one that the judge is having to try to protect his rights in this instance. And obviously the family has interest, an enormous interest, but the judge is really interested in making sure that he's done what he can to do to protect Kohberger as the accused in this instance. And so I certainly think that the judge, could say, I'm willing to entertain letters from the family about this, but it's just a different inquiry. And so I think it's going to be less in sort of, top of mind for the judge about how the families are looking at it. But I could see them say, look, I'm happy to hear from the families. I'm happy to, receive letters and hear their side of this. But it really is a sort of an offer and acceptance between a prosecutor and the defendant on this, and not as much of the family. What has always been really unusual in this case, Hallie, is how uninvolved the families have been in almost, again, just top to bottom things like whether the house should be destroyed, right? The house where they were killed was torn down, and the families were upset about that. There was a lot of other sort of back and forth, whether or not they should be, acquiescing to a change of venue, right? There were all these sort of micro moments along the way in this case where the family felt shut out. And so this is just going to be yet another one.
A huge one. And Laura, before, I know we're going to have to let you go off the phone here, but before we do, I think it's worth reminding folks that this has been among the highest profile cases in the country since, 2022, when these murders happened here. It has captivated the attention of people coast to coast here, given the nature of the crime, given the victims, given the circumstances here, Laura.
Yeah, and part of it is just the facts were so sort of breathtakingly awful from the very beginning. It was every parent's worst nightmare to have their kids sent off to college and something like this. I think there was also just so many questions about what was the motivation. We never got an answer as to what happened. And obviously he has maintained his innocence. He has denied any wrongdoing. He pled not guilty, or I should say he stood silent. He didn't actually ever plead. But the point is we never really got a full answer as to what happened. And I think one of the things the trial was going to, at least I hope, answer, and I think many people were hoping would answer, is what really went on there, and why did he allegedly zero in on them? What was it? What was the motivation there? And I think one of the things I'm sure the family is feeling like is they're not going to get as many answers now without having a full trial to assess all of that.
Laura, would a plea deal shine any light on any of that, any of those questions you just laid out, or could it be as simple as like a sentence or two and that's that?
It depends. I've seen it. I've seen it where, sometimes the defendant, after they sort of get the death penalty thing off the table, which is what he's probably most interested in right now, might actually make a statement. And I've seen people apologize. I've seen people sort of, have a completely different tune than they had going into trial. And I've also seen plenty of really tragic cases where the family has absolutely no idea whatever happened.
Wow. Laura Jarrett, we're glad that you scrambled onto the phone for us, given your extensive reporting on this case. Thank you. I know we'll see you later on tonight, tomorrow morning as well. We really appreciate you being with us. Let me go to our NBC News legal analysts now as we're covering these breaking developments. Again, what appears to be a plea deal for the suspect in the University of Idaho murders in 2022. You can see Camila Bernal is with us. We've got Danny Savalos as well. We've got Misty Maris joining us too. Danny, let me go to you here on this because Laura, I think, very cleanly laid out that this is not a done deal yet. And that is important to remind people. It sounds like Wednesday is going to be the day to watch in this case. What could we expect to see go down in court on that day?
Yeah, for criminal defense attorneys, the plea hearing is actually really stressful because you really never know what your client, the defendant, is going to say. And judges vary on the amount of facts they require on the record. We might see a scenario where the judge interrogates Kohberger on what exactly did you do? And you might see Kohberger balk at actually putting those facts on the record. Maybe
Danny, would that be contingent,
though?
Would he have to answer that question if a judge were to ask on Wednesday? Like, is that something that he would have to answer in order for this process to move forward?
Exactly right. So often what happens if you start interrogating the defendant, that's when they start going off script and maybe trying to massage the facts or give their version. And then the judge says, well, then I can't accept this plea. I don't know that this is going to happen in this case, but it happens all the time. I mean it when I say that plea hearings are actually more stressful for a defense attorney than the actual sentencing hearing, because that's something the lawyers have some control over. But the client, the defendant, can totally blow up the plea hearing if the defendant is unwilling to admit to the specific facts on the record. So I'm very curious to see what this judge will require for a factual basis on the record from the defendant at a plea hearing. And another factor, too, is that the Idaho law and the Idaho Constitution does allow victims, and that includes family members, they have a right to be heard. But that right to be heard cannot trump what the prosecutors ultimately agree to. But they do have a right to be heard. So I'm very curious to see what it is the family is upset about and what degree of communications prosecutors had with the family, because Idaho law and the Idaho Constitution require it.
Danny, stand by for a second. Misty, let me go to you because I know that you have been watching this case closely, and it sounds like, in your view, the defense had basically taken some hits with some of these recent pretrial motions and hearings that we've seen, which may help explain the sort of why now factor. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. So there were a lot of evidentiary decisions that have been happening leading up to this trial. First, there was a lengthy hearing regarding forensic evidence and what would come in, those DNA matches, the DNA that was found on the knife sheath, and the methodology that was used to connect it to Kohberger. The judge said that's all coming in. They also challenged some videotape where a Hyundai Elantra, white Hyundai Elantra, was seen on CCTV, on camera footage that puts him in the area of that house on the night of the murders. The defense said this is not continuous. It can't come in. The judge said it's coming in. And then lastly, the defense wanted to raise some alternate theories. They wanted to say there was an alternate perpetrator. They identified 4 people, the names are under seal, that they said had motive and opportunity to commit this crime. The judge said not enough evidence. And then the other was an alibi defense. They wanted to say, the defense wanted to say that Kohberger was driving around stargazing on the night of the murders. Now, this was to put him in that, have a reason why he was in that area. The judge said no. So all of those were blows to the defense leading up to the trial.
Danny, one of the things we've also talked about is the way that it seems in these various moments over the course of the last couple of years, and Laura laid this out well, the family had been, in their view, somewhat shut out from some of these key and critical decisions. Is that something, like how much in a typical case are family members of victims brought in to some of the machinations for the prosecution, et cetera, as cases move forward?
This case highlights the fact that victims and their family members are not clients of the prosecutors. They are not even parties to the case. But in the modern era, the trend is to increasingly pass legislation that gives these victims, including their families, and specifically including family members under Idaho law, the right to be heard. But the question becomes, what is the right to be heard? It's not the right to control. Victims and their families have never had the right to control the direction of prosecution. So often these statutes just give these victims and their families the opportunity to voice their opinion. But ultimately, the final decision is always with the prosecutor to enter into plea agreements. And then ultimately the punishment, the sentence, is up to the judge, or in the case of capital punishment, up to the sentencing jury. But although legislation increasingly is giving families of victims more and more rights to be heard, the bottom line is this: they will never be parties. They can never control the direction of the case and the decisions that are made by the state. So when you see that they're angry, it's understandable, because our system has never given them a controlling power in the outcome of a plea deal, a plea offer, or the ultimate sentence.
Let me bring in Dr. Casey Jordan, the forensic psychologist and NBC News contributor, who is joining us now, as well as, again, we are in rolling coverage now of these developments coming out of Idaho. News that has stunned, apparently, family members of the victims, based on what we are seeing from some of these public statements, as it appears that the suspect in those murders at the University of Idaho in 2022 has now appeared to accept a plea deal that is in the works now. There is a hearing on Wednesday. It is not a done deal yet, we should note. But Dr. Jordan, let me bring you in here on this, because Idaho, and I want you to talk about the context here, does not have an insanity defense, as it's called, right?
Correct. And it's the only state that has the death penalty but does not have the insanity defense. And from the outset, I was very surprised he wasn't pursuing a plea deal, but clearly he wanted to play the long game and, you know, try for all these alternative theories and see if he could get anywhere. I mean, Idaho is not the state to try that, to be honest. So here we are with him finally, if you will, facing the music. I mean, the jig is up if he goes to trial. And I was looking forward to the trial, of course. But you have an eyewitness. You have unbelievable forensic evidence and digital tracing. I mean, I cannot fathom any way he was going to be found anything other than guilty. Yes. And Idaho is a state that would love to apply the death penalty in a case like this. So I understand why the family feels cheated. His only chance was the insanity defense.
Dr. Jordan, there's also, as we've been talking about, this family statement. And so far, again, this is on the Facebook page of the Gonsalves family, saying that they are essentially beyond furious that the state of Idaho, they believe, has failed them. This is a family, and we've seen this from some of the other victims' families as well, that at various critical moments, Dr. Jordan, throughout this case, as this case has developed, when the 911 calls were released, for example, we have seen them release statements publicly. In other words, they seem to understand that the high level of interest in this, in the circumstances around this case, in the horrific nature of the death of their children here. And this appears to also be part and parcel of that now. They were among the first to come out and say, you know, in that statement, alluding to this plea deal that appears to be on the table here.
I understand their concerns, their emotions, their heartbreak at not having what they consider to be their day in court. and they are indirect victims of this crime. The fact that he's willing to take a plea deal, it's only a matter of days or weeks before we can call him the murderer instead of the suspect. And I think they really wanted that process. It's very cathartic for them. But you're right. Some of these families, not all of them, have been involved in documentaries, in making very public statement, and basically using the media as a tool for getting their emotions out there. And in addition to being a criminologist, I'm also a lawyer, and I understand their concerns. But this is the state of Idaho against Bryan Kohberger versus Bryan Kohberger. Yeah. It's not the families. The state of Idaho has to do what's best for all the people of Idaho. And I believe the plea deal is in the best interest of everyone there. They would have gotten a conviction, but is it really worth dragging it out if he was given the death penalty for years and years and years? It's typically 10 to 20 years before somebody who gets the death penalty is actually executed, if they're ever executed. And that gives them a platform and keeps them in the limelight. So I love the idea that this guy's going to go away with 4 sentences, 4 murder convictions, never see the light of day, can never be paroled. I think limiting the amount of exposure he has in the media is one of the best things we can do for his ego.
I should, Dr. Jordan, thank you. That's important context here. I should note that we still don't know a lot of the details of what this plea deal would or would not entail. We expect to find those out in the hours to come. But Danny, as somebody who is in your other job, your day job, a criminal defense attorney, can you help us understand what the conversations may have looked like between the defense team and between Bryan Kohberger here about the possibility of a plea deal being on the table? Is that something that comes up early on in the process, early on as the case has been taken up? Does that only come up once there have been some setbacks for the defense? How does that typically unfold?
I am so fascinated by this issue because it's something, you're absolutely right. It's something that defense attorneys have to deal with throughout a long pretrial process early on. You must communicate to the client the opportunity to take a plea and to consider pleading guilty. And oftentimes at the beginning, the client wants nothing to do with a plea. Now, what's very interesting here is that Kohberger, in the case of public defenders or court-appointed attorneys, the client or the defendant is not losing their own money. So they have maybe an increased incentive to go to trial. You often see in cases where private counsel is being paid, clients and defendants, they run out of money and it makes them rethink a plea. Now, of course, they can only plead guilty if they are, in fact, guilty, but that finances are often a consideration. That was not a consideration in this case. So maybe someday we'll find out what the tipping point was for Bryan Kohberger. It might have been the loss of the opportunity to delay the trial. It might have been the loss of some of these motions. And I just have to say, as an aside, never have I seen defense attorneys fight so valiantly. They must have filed hundreds of motions. They filed every motion I've ever imagined, and then some I've never even heard of. They fought valiantly, and so I wonder at what point Bryan Kohberger decided, I have changed my mind, I'm going to take a plea. Because his attorneys publicly, they didn't just say he's not guilty, we're going to defend him. They didn't give those pat answers. They affirmatively said things like, we believe he is innocent. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah, but these defense attorneys fought the good fight. It'll be very interesting if we ever find out why Kohberger changed his mind and when.
I just want to also say, too, and Misty, let me bring you in on this. There is a chance, right? We are providing information here, 6:53 p.m. Eastern, about what we know to be true based on our reporting as we are sourcing it to you from, again, the attorney for one of the family members here, that there appears to be this plea deal. It is potential, Misty, potentially possible that this blows up on Wednesday, right?
Absolutely. That plea hearing, as Danny says, he's absolutely right. That is a stressful day. The judge could ask questions. There's a record that's created. Also, the Kohberger will need to say that he is knowingly and voluntarily entering into this plea deal, that he understands what this means as far as his rights as a defendant, that there's no appellate process. If he does this, he can't appeal the plea or the sentence. So all of that is going to play out on Wednesday, and we may learn more at that hearing. But until it's done, it is not done. So we're just seeing the reporting. This could certainly fall apart in the coming days, or we could get more insight on Wednesday as to what we're really going to hear on the record.
Camila, let me go to you because you reported from Idaho in the days after this happened. You were, I know, launched up there. You were one of the teams in place, and you talked to a lot of people in and around the community. the intense focus on what had happened, this just shocking set of circumstances, is part of the reason why the defense team wanted a change of venue for this case, right?
It absolutely is. And back in November of 2022, everyone was terrified. It took some time for authorities to hone in on Bryan Kohberger. And when you were in Moscow, Idaho, everybody would be looking at each other to see who would have done this. Everybody was scared of someone they didn't know in town. This is obviously a small college town, and everyone was scared, not just in Moscow, but around the nation as people learned about this nightmare. Of course, the families have gone through so much. We've gone through a roller coaster. You know, a lot of times we forget that first day when we first reported on all of this, authorities there said there was no foul play. And then the next day, or a few days later, is when they said, actually, yes, it appears that these students were targeted. So it's been a roller coaster of emotions for so many people as they've watched all of this unfold. And of course, when we found out about Bryan Kohberger, everybody sort of breathed a little bit easier because they knew that there was at least a suspect in this case. The families, we've been talking a lot about the families, and they have gone through so much. You know, I spoke to Steve Gonsalves a few months ago, and he had told me how difficult it was to start getting some of this information as we learned more, as we reported more. He would say, you know, this is like drowning and then coming up for air and then getting pushed back down again. Those were the kinds of things that Steve and the whole family had been talking about, and they really wanted to see this trial because they wanted to know what happened in this case. And if it doesn't happen, there's of course going to be still a lot of questions for people who are in Moscow, for people all over the country who wanted to know how this all happened. We've seen small details in terms of the Amazon purchases, in terms of the surveillance video, but there are still so many more questions that a lot of people were hoping to get the answers to during this trial. We'll see what we get. You know, we talked about also Bryan Kohberger not even saying anything during his plea. So it will be interesting to see if he says anything on Wednesday, and we expect him to, likely. But he didn't even want to speak during his plea. It was the judge who entered a not guilty plea on his behalf.
Right.
Of course, he was a student in all of this. He knew what he was doing, in a sense. And so it'll be interesting to see how he handles this one.
There has also been, as we talk about the intense level of interest here, and Danny, I'll go to you on this, when you talk about what happens in the courtroom, what happens in the court of public opinion as well. We've followed a number of the developments, including the judge allowing a roommate to testify. This is the only known eyewitness of the whatever happened that night, of the murders that night, who repeatedly mentioned seeing, and I'm quoting here, bushy eyebrows. This became a real point of contention. I think people will remember at one of these hearings back in the spring. But the judge called that testimony highly relevant because of the fact that this roommate was really the only survivor, the only known person who saw what went down.
The only reason this became an issue, and you're looking at the picture of the alleged bushy eyebrows now, the only reason this became an issue is because Kohberger's defense team fought on every single issue, and they challenged the witness. I've done this before, where you have a witness you don't like, and you think, well, how can I challenge not what they say, but their ability to have seen what they say they've said? So, for example, you show that maybe their vision was blocked, or in this case, that she was clouded, this witness, by her intoxication or the fact that she was tired. And so instead, early on, sometimes you challenge whether the witness really even saw what they said they saw. And that's the only reason we get this sort of debate about bushy eyebrows. And really what the defense was arguing was such an uphill battle. They were saying that, look, this isn't exactly an eyewitness identifying Kohberger. The only thing the witness is saying is that she saw bushy eyebrows. And that's not enough for an identification. She was too tired. She was too intoxicated. She shouldn't even, we're challenging her ability to have even seen this. What an uphill battle. What a long shot motion. And that's the only reason this came out into the ether for us to look at. The reality was the judge made the right call. Something like this is an issue of credibility. The defense is free to cross-examine the witness. Oh, did you see anything in addition to bushy eyebrows? Where were you standing? How much did you have to drink? But that's a trial issue. That's not something that gets knocked out pre-trial. And that's how, because of that fight, the defense attorneys fought. That's why the bushy eyebrows even came out as early as they did, instead of as they normally would have at trial through cross-examination.
And just quickly, Danny, given that jury selection was supposed to start in almost literally, I think, a month from today, I want to say July 30th, how far along would the prosecution have been in building this case and preparing for trial to begin in August?
I would assume they were mostly ready by now. Keep in mind, as much as there were filings on this case, both sides filed so many motions. I've never seen so many. There were also so many that were what's called ex parte. They were hidden. They were sealed. We didn't even see most of the motions. Presumably, they'll be unsealed at some point in the future. And we may have a wealth of knowledge about this case that we never imagined. And I expect that to be true. And in fact, one of the judges even remarked that, hey, we're doing too much of this ex parte, sealed, not on the record. And once the case is over, presumably those things will be unsealed and we'll learn a lot more about what the prosecution had. But when you consider that even what was publicly known was so damning, I can't imagine how much more they had. The prosecution was ready to go.
I want to thank all of you, Danny, Misty, Camila, Casey. I'd like you to stand by, though, for just a minute, because we are now ticking across to 7 o'clock Eastern time, 4 p.m. out west, where we have major breaking news. What can only be described as a bombshell apparent plea deal out of Idaho, where the man accused of brutally killing 4 University of Idaho students in 2022 has apparently been offered and has accepted a plea deal, according to an attorney for one of the victims' families. We're talking here about Bryan Kohberger. His trial was highly anticipated, set to begin just about a month from now, in a case that shook the small college town of Moscow, Idaho, shook the country, really, with that trial just weeks away. Kohberger is accused of stabbing and killing Zana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Ethan Chapin. He'd been facing the death penalty. Now, the family of Kaylee Gonsalves on a Facebook family page posting online just as this story was developing this, saying, "It's true. We are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us," the statement says. They go on to say, "Please give us some time. This was very unexpected. We appreciate all your love and support." Unexpected indeed, in what is a shocking word of this plea deal with our team following these updates for us. Camila Bernal, Danny Savalos, criminologist Casey Jordan, legal analyst Misty Maris, Laura Jarrett on the phone as well. And you'll see Keith Morrison, too, our Dateline correspondent, who has covered this case closely for years. Keith, thank you for being on with us as we have a number of developments tonight. This apparent plea deal here. You have been following this just, I think, 6 weeks ago. You and Dateline came out with new pieces of information that would likely have been presented at the trial. This video of what appeared to be Kohberger's car driving in the area. How surprising is it to see it take a turn like this? And we should note, it is not a done deal until this hearing on Wednesday when a judge signs off on this.
Exactly right. I mean, you could not be down with a feather, however. The idea that this would be a plea deal is a complete surprise to a lot of people. However, when you look at the evidence that has been assembled, it's pretty significant evidence. It would be a tough case for the defense. It would certainly be a long, arduous trial. And the death penalty was available. I can only assume that the prosecution would have contemplated at least whether or not they made the offer earlier to take the death penalty off the table in exchange for guilty pleas. And perhaps that's simply what happened, that Kohberger may have recognized he can't possibly have prevailed in this case, and that the only answer really was to take a plea, spend the rest of his life in prison. I know that the families would rather have something harsher than that, but at least one of them would. But there it is, and certainly it will speed the process.
You know, you talk about the anger from at least the Gonsalves family, and I should note that at NBC News, we have obviously reached out to everybody involved in this story. These developments are coming in very quickly in just the last maybe 60 minutes or so. But Keith, I know you spoke with, I believe, the mom of somebody who was supposed to be staying over at this particular house on the night of the murder. She was incredibly emotional talking with you on Dateline here, which I think speaks to the way that this story has reverberated around not just Moscow, Idaho, but around the country as well.
Oh, sure it has. I mean, it's a horrifying story, a terrifying tale, really, about the progression of somebody to in a position where he could accomplish that sort of thing, or could even contemplate accomplishing that sort of thing. And we were waiting to see it all play out in the trial. I know the judge was not terribly happy with some of the information we were able to put out there, but the fact was, it was there. The evidence is looking pretty significant. So here we are now. The Idaho Statesman is saying that they have a copy of the letter, and that they are confirming that this is what's going to happen, and that there will be a hearing on Wednesday where, the deal will be made.
Keith, if you can, and I know how busy you are, I'm going to ask you to stand by for just a second, only because I think this is an important moment to bring in our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett, because as Keith mentions and talks about here, Laura, this case, important to note here that the defense had a series of setbacks, and that when we look ahead to this court hearing on Wednesday, it is the judge who will have to sign off on this ultimately. Would we expect that to happen on Wednesday, Laura? Might that take some time?
It could easily happen on Wednesday. It could be the case that there are filings under seal that we don't know about, Hallie. As you've been, I know, going through this with various guests all evening, there have been a ton of filings recently under seal and even hearings under seal, and we have no idea what happened there. And so it may be that the judge knows more about this than we do, but certainly the judge could be prepared, with a fair, a little bit of notice to ask the defendant the series of classic questions about making sure that this is voluntary and that this is not coerced, and that he understands, Kohberger would be understanding that he would be waiving his right to an appeal. So he doesn't get to change his mind if he decides to accept this deal and the judge agrees that he's doing it knowing and voluntary and intelligently. There would be no do-overs. It would be done. Now, we can all think of examples where plea deals fell apart. Remember Hunter Biden?
That's right. Hunter Biden came to mind right away. Yeah.
Yeah, so the judge is under an obligation to the defendant in a case to make sure that he understands exactly what rights he's giving up. And you understand why Kohberger, understanding what he was facing here, why he might make this calculation. What I think a lot of people are puzzled with tonight is why the prosecutors did this. Going into a trial like this, yes, it costs money, it's resources. There's always risks going into a trial, but they had all the leverage, Hallie, going into this. They had any number of victories with this judge. Once they got a new judge, they kept winning in front of the judge on evidentiary issues. And even before all of that, they went into it with cell phone data. They went into it with surveillance footage. They had a fair amount of circumstantial evidence. They said that they had his DNA at the crime scene, right? So they're going into this with maximum leverage, the prosecutors are. And so why they would decide in the 11th hour with less than 2 months to go until trial, and so they're definitely prepared right now to go to trial, but why they would decide after they've already spent all this money and time over the course of almost 3 years and led the parents to believe that they were going to go to trial, why they would decide now is the time to put this type of offer out on the table and be prepared to accept it if Kohberger goes for it, is the part I think that's going to be baffling to the parents, and I think might speak to why we saw that angry statement from them tonight.
Given the fury that emanated from that Facebook page statement from the Gonsalves family, would a judge, Laura, take into consideration victim opposition to a plea deal in a case like this?
He can, and he could say, look, I'm going to slow this down. We're going to hear from the family. They can write me a letter. They can, even get on the stand and talk to me about it. But again, this is really about assessing whether Kohberger is making an intelligent and voluntary and non-coerced choice. It's certainly that the family has an enormous interest here, given what is at stake and what's involved. But it's really a matter of making sure that Kohberger understands his right as the accused, as the defendant, as somebody who has a right to go to trial and make the state prove their case. And so that's what Judge Hippler's primary focus is going to be when he holds that change of plea hearing. Because remember, as of right now, he's on the record saying that he's going to be acquitted at trial, and that his attorney was saying any number of times, even recently, that his position was that he was innocent and that there were alternative possible suspects. The judge just didn't go for any of that. That was part of, a string of losses that he suffered recently. But he will have to go on record saying he is pleading guilty if, in fact, he goes forward with a change of plea. He'll have to go on record with that. And he can make statements. He can apologize. I've seen that plenty of times in court. Or he can do nothing, and he can just accept that he's changing his plea to guilty.
Laura Jarrett, our senior legal correspondent who's been covering this case from the start. Laura, thank you for being with us. Danny, let me go to you, our legal analyst. How much information may we find out once we see some of the documentation around what is this apparent plea deal? Will it be short, couple of sentences? Might it be something more fulsome? The judge may press Bryan Kohberger on some of this too, right?
That's the thing I'm looking for the most. Every judge is different. Some judges just require you to say, I'm pleading to this because I am in fact guilty, and everybody moves on. Some judges start asking a lot of questions. Defense attorneys always prepare their clients that, look, it might be quick, or you might have to answer quite a few questions to establish what's called a factual basis for the plea. And the judge cannot take the plea unless the judge has a factual basis. What that is depends on each individual judge. So it's very possible we might see some more probing questions from the judge on Wednesday to find out what exactly, whether he's entering to this plea voluntarily, whether it's knowing, whether he admits to the specific facts on the record. And look, anything can blow it up. For example, the question that always makes my heart race: are you satisfied with the representation of your counsel? That makes every lawyer wonder, what's he going to say? Because if he says he's not, then that blows up the plea. If you can't get through the plea colloquy, as it's called, a scripted list of questions, then the plea cannot be taken. And Bryan Kohberger, as we pointed out, is someone who chose to stand mute way back at his arraignment. So will he be up for any theatrics during his plea hearing, his change of plea hearing more specifically? Time will tell.
You're seeing some of the images here of Kohberger in the courtroom at various points over the last couple of years after a case that stunned the country because of the horrific circumstances of these murders. Let me play now that 911 call that had come in the night that it happened. Listen to this.
One of the roommates has passed out, and she was drunk last night and she's not waking up. Oh, and I saw some man in their house last night. Yeah.
They say they saw some man in their house last night, suspected, of course, to be Bryan Kohberger. Keith Morrison, I want to go to you because Kohberger had apparently been studying criminology, which is one of the threads that had, I think, surprised people when it came out. You, I know, have spoken with people who had met Kohberger before he was charged.
Oh, indeed, yeah. And not only studying criminology, he was a PhD student in criminology whose master's professor said that he was one of the brightest students she ever had. He was a socially awkward young man who had difficulty with making relationships, but seemed to be very interested in getting close to attractive women, and kept a lot of pictures of women on his cell phone, and just behaved in ways that were considered rather odd. Seemed to like the dark a great deal. But also, I should point out, given what you've been talking about, he has developed, if I may say it this way, it might sound I don't know whether it sounds right or not, but he has developed a bit of a fan base in jail. And thus one wonders whether or not except not such a terrible thing for him. I know that there are other serial killers who have been spending their lives in prison, who have lots of fans, and they get letters all the time. Life isn't as bad in prison as they perhaps thought it might have been.
Keith Morrison, our Dateline correspondent, our thanks to you, to Camila Bernal, Danny Savalos, Casey Jordan, Misty Maris, everyone else who has joined us here with this rolling coverage, including Laura Jarrett as well. Much more to follow as we look ahead to that court hearing on Wednesday. Again, not a done deal, this apparent plea deal for Bryan Kohberger, but more to come here on NBC News. That does it for us for this extended hour. We've got more coverage picking up with Top Story right now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.